Jason. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Thank you. First of all, thank you to be here with us. It's an honor for Agile Spain and for all the community to have this opportunity to exchange and have this little conversation with you. It's a real honor.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate the invite.
So we are create some question with our local community, and I would like to exchange with you. So if you are ready, we can start right now.
Yeah, works for me.
Yeah,
Yep.
Great. So first point, we would like to exchange, as you are an expert of cultural change for many years, we would like to speak with you, and we have some doubts. For example, the first question that I would like to make it is, what do you think, in your point of view, is the most important factor in changing a company's culture towards an agile mindset? What do you think?
Yeah, that's one of these questions that has been asked ever since the manifesto came about in 2001. So what is that, 25 years ago almost?
Yeah.
Yeah. And nobody has the real answer, but I'll give it a shot, because culture is such a difficult thing to put your finger on, right? We kind of talk about how there's a good culture and a bad culture. People like to say a culture that's aligned with Agile's and values and principles is right, and a rigid, structured control culture is wrong. But it's a lot more gray than that. I think there's other factors, not just the sum of the interactions between people that creates culture. I think it's also the markets and the markets that companies serve. So if anybody's ever worked in, a telecom or a capital markets department or something like that, they tend to be maybe a little more hostile and a little more structured and control oriented, just given the nature of the market that they serve. One of the capital markets groups that I worked in one of the banks here, there's a lot of pressure on those folks because they're supporting, institutional investors, where time is money. If a feature isn't working or they need something, they need it right now, and they're going to push. And Agile is not so much compatible with a push-based system. So I think market and, other globalization factors, region, those things tend to affect culture more. I did a interesting liftoff with a multinational manufacturing organization, and we had brought people from, I think, 7 or 8 different countries to Vienna to do a liftoff for this change team. We had people from Spain, UK, China, US, Germany, all together. And we actually talked about the real strength of the culture of the company is in the differences between the cultures, right? Like the folks in Spain have the thing that works for them. The folks in UK have things that work for them. In Germany, things work a little bit different. But it wasn't so much, how do we create a culture around the Agile mindset for all of us? It was, how do I in Canada learn what could help me from how you facilitate change in Spain? So it became more of a celebration of the differences, as opposed to what we normally do is label anything different from mine as bad. So for me, it really comes down to, I'm going to shift the culture, interaction by interaction.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try to get other people to shift their mindset and, think the same as me, but every interaction I make with people in the organization is going to be based on what my beliefs are. And then other people some will come along for the ride, some won't. But I think it's more complicated than to say, we have a culture of an Agile mindset or we don't. It can't be binary. It's very gray. Well, actually, it's very colorful. It's not just binary.
Yeah. You say something really interesting. Day by day, it's quite interesting, but it's not easy. All the days continues.
Yeah, that's how I don't think any company planned their way consciously into the culture they have. It's not like 20 years ago, a company set out to have a really rigid control-based culture where they couldn't get anything done. It just happened through those interactions. Production went down, and then we created a bunch of rules. And then we had this problem, and we reacted to it, and we created another bunch of rules. And then that cruft just built up over time. And then now we see this thing that we don't like.
Yeah.
and we want to change it to something else, but we kind of have to do the same thing that got us in the mess, interaction by interaction, but with the new values we say we want.
Totally agree with you. Yeah, good point. Good reflection. So, focusing on the operational level, how can we manage if management work with silos and a waterfall mindset? How can we manage this type of change? Because maybe you have experience, you see in your companies or in the markets, as you mentioned before. So how do you handle this?
Yeah, in a way, it's similar to the first question. It's managing at the smallest interactions in a way. One telecom that I worked for, very strong silos, very much a waterfall mentality, if you want to call it that. We came in as external agile coaches, and this was well before COVID. So everybody is in the office, right? So we're working with teams in the office and stuff. And I'm working with one team on one initiative, and one of my colleagues, Chris, is working with another one. We're on the same floor. So just think of this giant rectangle, and right in the middle is the elevator bank. So on one side was my team, and on the other side was his team. We're working together on a program. None of these teams ever talk to each other. Now, because we were the outsiders and the coaches, whenever we would run into problems on either of our respective teams, it was, oh, let's just walk over and talk to that other team. Or let's have one person from our team attend their stand-up and vice versa. And then we started to run into all the organizational problems where some of the teams would want to charge the other department because everything works with internal billing codes, and you have to bill your time to a project. So some teams would say, well, no, we're not going to go to another team's planning meeting because I can't charge them 4 hours over 2 weeks for that. So we had those kind of problems. But when we're talking about sometimes you need an outside perspective to show how silly some of those silos are. Like two teams, they sit on the same floor. There's just an elevator bank between them and they don't talk. So we're just like, wouldn't it be easy just to walk over there and like ask somebody, or like go look at their Kanban board and see what's going on? So some outside disturbance that disrupts patterns. And like I mentioned with the previous one, it really is interaction at a time. Try to find the movers, people who are natural collaborators across the organizational development world calls it vertical and horizontal boundaries, right? So your stacks of hierarchy, all that type of stuff. So there's always going to be natural collaborators in different silos. Try to find who they are, because they're going to be the people who kind of link these silos together to start to break those walls down a little bit. But it's going to be in small little chunks. Like it's not a problem you can solve quick. And there's so many other factors, right? How are people punished or rewarded when they step outside of their silo? So knowing all that stuff can help you figure out like what's the right way to poke the system.
Yeah, I identify myself with a similar example that you are mentioned that I'm laughing because I remember a similar situation, and we are in different countries and with different cultures, different market probably, but same behaviors.
Yeah,
Curious.
yeah, because it's normal. You're used to it. Well, I work with my team in this place, and that's it. And then you don't think that, oh crap, I could just go email somebody or take the operations manager out for a coffee and ask some questions. We forget about those simple things.
Let me focus now in agile contracts. How can we have agile contracts and convince both management and customer? Because today, when we are speaking with customer, some of them say, yes, okay, we are interested in work with an agile method or framework or whatever. But later, when they are going to send departments and they have problem with the contracts and something like that to sing it. So what do you think? How do you manage this?
The way that I deal with it, I guess it's the same way that I would deal with it in my own work, and it would depend if I'm doing contract or consulting work versus building software work.
Okay.
So I actually just went through this with a client a few months ago, same kind of thing. They wanted to hire an outside agile coach. Those are really difficult things to price. So we just started talking about, budget, how much money do they want to spend on solving this problem? And long story short, scope was always the variable. So for me, it was more talking about the process of how we're going to work together. So for example, if you're going to hire me for 20 hours, a 20-hour contract, you choose how those 20 hours are spent.
Yeah.
So here's the you can call it a backlog if you're using Scrum language or whatever, but here's the list of stuff that I think would make the most sense for me to help you with. You can reorder this however you want. You can reprioritize this. You can add whatever you want. You can take stuff away. Doesn't matter. Our constraint is those 20 hours. So you're never going to go over this budget, but you're always going to get the most valuable thing. And it's a lot harder to do because it's uncertain for people that are trying to hire you.
Yeah.
Right? Like they want to know, what's the deliverable? Tell me the 5 deliverables. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just being honest with yourself and being congruent to say, I wish I could predict the future, but I can't. Here's the things that I think are going to be the outcomes. Here's the things I think I'm going to help you with. If after 2 of those 20 hours are used and the rest of the plan doesn't make any sense, we'll change it. So I think showing them that you're going to work that way can work.
Yeah, the difficult part is to choose these 5 deliverables or these 5 outcomes. I mean,
yes,
what is the most important, no? The most urgent.
Yes, yeah. It's a little easier with software because like you're showing stuff that gets built, but when you're talking about like coaching and consulting practices and stuff, it's trickier. Yeah.
In your point of view, what could be new models of change? Because in the past we have some models. There are new methods like lean change management, and you are discovering new things, I think. What do you think? How do you vision the future?
I think a return to simplicity. Because I think, ever since humans started interacting with each other, there's been the need to change things. And it's always been about relationships and connections and interactions. All of the models and frameworks and stuff is just noise on top of it. Like I'll see people post about, this is our human-centered approach to change management. Go fill out this template. Like for me, that doesn't make any sense, right? It's about relationships and actions. And I think almost a simplification about how we approach change, because it is all about exploring systems and figuring out how to intervene in systems in the right way at the right time. And a lot of that is intuition and art. I think we will in some way rely less on prescriptive frameworks and more on full stack change agents is what I'm calling it. I mean, you probably remember when full stack developer became a term, right?
Yes.
Like you couldn't just be the Java guy anymore or the Java girl or Java person, right? You had to learn more things. And I think, especially with AI, we're seeing a shift like that and change. You can't just be the comms person anymore. You can't just be the trainer. You've got to be more multi-skilled, which I hope will bring more of the human element back in, because we'll be focused less on our role and responsibilities and more on doing what's the right thing for this change at this time.
I never hear about full stack agent, but I like it this
Yeah.
this ladder.
Yeah.
Curious. Really interesting, yeah. Open another topic about complexity, because I know that you are now focusing on system thinking and complexity for change, and you are exploring these methods. So what are the challenges for agile coaches or these full stack agents in complex systems who lead or guide people that are living in constant change?
I think one is trying to make complexity and systems thinking's topics more accessible to people. A lot of the literature out there is very academic, and people struggle with how to apply it. it's difficult to walk into a CFO's office and say, well, see here, systems complexity says, you're just going to lose them. So how can we help people in our organizations? I like to use the phrase untangle the hairball, right? But not so much like, don't talk about VUCA, don't talk about gimmicks and buzzwords, and don't talk about academic complexity and stuff like that, but really help them understand intentional and unintended consequences of change when we try to change our systems. Not focusing on a phrase that we hear in Agile, which is embrace uncertainty, which is easy to say from the outside, but it's more about how do we manage it or not necessarily become more comfortable with it. How do we address the uncertainty we feel about the future? And when that becomes real in an organization, it's things like, what are the 3 actions we need to take this week so we're further ahead? And then where's our feedback loop where we're going to learn from what we did and tune and adjust? So simple, clean language, not so much, well, see here, we're in the complex domain, which means we have to probe, sense, and respond. Nobody cares about that stuff. Nobody cares about the academic, intellectual, theoretical stuff about complexity. But we all need to understand it enough to help coach our organizations.
I agree with you. Interesting, very interesting. And how can we make companies release that they live in complexity? Because it's quite important for agile coaches, but also for companies that see what happens, that they are in complexity walls because the changing are continuous with new technologies or with new information every day, every hour. So how can we help them, or how can we make to change their mindset?
Stories and narratives. I'm a big fan of stories and narratives. So when we want to do something new and we have that feeling of uncertainty, or we have the problem of so many dependencies that we find ourselves in a chaotic or complex situation, look at stories or narratives about how we've handled this stuff in the past and what happened and what we might want to try differently this time around. Because people can rally around that. We can look at a case study from Nokia or Kodak or Southwest Airlines or any of these famous case studies, or Netflix, for example, and on the other side of that coin, Blockbuster. So why did Blockbuster go under? It's not because they didn't embrace the uncertainty. They didn't have, well, it's hard to say what it was. Why didn't Blockbuster start streaming? Could have been a whole pile of reasons. Could have been the person who was making decisions was more conservative and didn't want to spend the money. Could be there was pressure from the board to get revenue up, which meant doing their existing business model. There's so many factors that are involved in this, but I think if we tell stories, we look at how we've done things in the past and why we've done it that way, how it worked out. If we want a different outcome, what should we change about that? So again, keep the language clean, and stories engage people, right? Nobody wants to look at a process model or a diagram, but if you start to share stories and stuff like that, I think you'll lead to better conversations.
Well, so cool, interesting. We can link these stories what the conversation that today we are having in the Spanish community. There are some authors and some relevant people for companies on something like that. I mean, maybe in Canada, in United States, I see this type of posts or newsletter information that are speaking about Agile is dead or Agile is not working anymore. And what do you think about that?
I wrote a couple of posts about this. It was Agile is doing just fine, part 1 and part 2. But it's kind of one of those things. I mean, the change world has gone through the same thing. People have been writing change management is dead for the last decade. I think there's multiple causes. At least here in Canada, this is probably global too, but I know for sure in Canada, it's really tough to get an Agile coaching contract these days. You know, like back 10, 15 years ago when, you could sell a 6-month, 5-day-a-week engagement for $3,500 a day, you could throw a stone and hit somebody that would give you that money. Now nobody wants to spend that anymore. Part of it's post-COVID. Part of it is just the trend of globalization and inflation and costs going up and revenue going down, people not going
Yeah.
back to the office. Like there's a lot of factors that are leading to companies wanting to be more frugal with how they spend money. Many of them want their agile coaches to be employees at a quarter of the rate they could get in this old world. So I think some of the agile is dead is I'm upset that I'm not making as much money as I used to be. I think some of it is I see what big business has done to agile, and that goes against my beliefs, so I need to lash out. And some of it is I have something I want to sell, so I have to do something provocative. I think there's a lot of reasons why people talk about it, but for me, it's kind of like saying, I tried soccer and soccer doesn't work. Therefore, soccer is dead, right? It's like just because you suck at it doesn't mean it's dead. Like agile is just a thing. It's
Yeah.
never going to die. And companies that are succeeding with it, they're not telling their stories. Like we're only hearing the bad stories. We're only hearing the perspective of scrum masters and agile coaches and consultants who can't get as much work as they used to. That's where I think this noise is coming from. You'll see an article that, Salesforce fired 180 scrum masters, and then immediately, agile is dead because of that one isolated piece of data. And then there's been a few more since then. So I think it's mostly noise. I think it's doing just fine. I think companies that need it and are getting the benefit from it are using it.
Yeah, I would like some sentence that you say that agile is the vehicle, no? It's not the goal. It's the vehicle to get results or to have a best product or give value to the customers. Very interesting. And what?
Yeah.
And what is the present and the future of agile? What do you think?
I'm seeing more and more people, parachuting into the change space. Like that's always been my view since the mid 2000s is agile has just been the thing, the trigger we latch onto, but it's always been about change and systems and people. And I think more people are starting to recognize that. We saw the same thing with Scrum and Kanban and all the popularity of the methods that have kind of evolved over time. You see these folks that, I'm going to put all my money on Scrum. I'm going to do Scrum training. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. Once that market dries up, oh, Kanban's the new thing. I'm going to jump into Kanban. Oh, I'm going to jump into Management 3.0. Oh, crap, it's all about change. I'm going to jump into change. I think that's normal. And I see a lot more people talking about stuff, that me and other folks before me have been talking about for decades. Because it really is about organizational change. It always has been. We're just running out of shiny things to latch onto. Yeah. So I think the future is not worrying so much about the labels, hopefully, and more worrying about how do we help our people in our companies solve problems. Right? Creative problem solving is the only skill that matters. The rest of it is just noise, in my opinion.
Who doesn't want to solve problems?
Yeah,
when you ask that in a company, nobody. I'm going to answer you. No, me no.
If you really think about all the work that you've done, and you really boil it away to what it is that companies want, they want help solving problems. But they'll often come to you and say, we need an agile coach to make us more agile. That's not what they want.
Yeah.
There's problems they can't really articulate or put their finger on, and they need somebody from the outside with that skill set to come in, and you're a problem solver.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, we are arriving to the end. So last question about the roles you mentioned before, full stack agents. Do you have another type of role or a skill such as that today it's really many people are really speaking about that are also interesting for agile coaches or this full stack agent that you mentioned? What are the newest skills that they should develop?
Yeah, I think definitely more well-rounded skills, more I think more about skills than roles. I understand roles are important because people, it's hard to say I'm a change agent and I work in the white space. People don't know what that means. It's kind of like you're aware of the system and you look for cracks in the system so you can try to help and solve and plug those cracks and stuff like that. Um, you know, I think more emphasis on coaching skills. So maybe not necessarily having an agile coach role or title or
Yeah.
department, but having people with coaching skills. I think being a change agent is a natural progression from all the agile coaches I know, right?
Hmm.
Like they can step into those change or leadership roles because they know how to do that stuff. Um, so I think, problem solving, definitely. Systems and complexity, coaching, learning those skill sets to help people and organizations solve problems, and not so much having, an agile coaching department, a business agility department, these other departments and roles. Like forget about the labels and the buzzwords, but focus on trying to develop that skill. Um, a really good metaphor the Canadian government had was they had a program called a free agent program.
Mm.
And it was basically people who were government employees that had the freedom to sort of roam around the government and help people solve problems. Like that's a very oversimplistic way that I described it, but that's kind of how it worked. So you get people that they're not going to stay in a job for 10 years. They're going to want to focus on a problem, and when they get bored, they're going to want to go somewhere else. So enabling those people to work outside the lines of your org chart because they're good problem solvers, they're great at asking questions, they're very relatable, like having those free agent type of roles that where you're not bound by the hierarchy necessarily.
Great. Super. Uh,
Mm.
Awesome. So we are right to the end. It's a pity because I would like to speak with you many, many hours, but as I mentioned before, it's an honor to be with you. Only to the last point, could you send a message to our community and give a message or something that you want?
The one that's been rattling around my head recently is get curious, not furious. So if you're working as a change agent, whether you're a change manager, agile coach, scrum master, whatever it is, when things aren't going the way that you want them to or expect them to, get curious and find out what's going on underneath, as opposed to lashing out at the system.
Great. Maybe next year I will see people with this T-shirt with "Get Curious, Not Furious."
Yeah,
You
I
have
learned that
it.
from
Maybe it's
a friend of
interesting.
mine, Andrew Annett, who I used to coach with, and yeah, it's always stuck in my head. Yeah,
Great. So thank you so much. It's an honor. Thank you for this conversation and thank you for your time.
awesome.
It's a
Thank you
pleasure.
for the invite. I appreciate it.